Hello everyone, welcome. I'm filming this video to just give sort of a free-flowing short lecture on Shakespeare and Shakespeare's life, the England that he was living within. And I'm making this in preparation for teaching Hamlet. Although in the future I might use this for other Shakespeare texts I teach. Taught several Shakespeare texts over the years: Hamlet, King Lear, Twelfth Night, Richard III. Shakespeare is actually a very passionate subject of mine. I'm an American Lit person, but I almost specialized in Shakespeare during my academic career. I've actually have been in a production of Hamlet too, so I've seen the acting side of the aisle as well. No, but just a little bit about Shakespeare. We're reading this in World Lit, where we've read a couple of authors. We've already read Milton. Milton was a couple of generations after Shakespeare. So you guys have already seen a little bit of Milton's English. Shakespeare is easier to read than Milton, I think. But the thing with Shakespeare is this. Shakespeare has, well, I wouldn't say a bad rap, but he's mythologized to the point of absurdity, I think. Lots of times you guys will read Shakespeare in high school, maybe something like Romeo and Juliet. You guys actually don't really see the human side of Shakespeare through high school teaching. Shakespeare was a really earthy guy. He wrote these tragedies, he wrote these comedies. They're all full of great humor and puns, sex jokes. His English seems a little strange to us these days, but it's really not much different than. Well, so just for instance, the King James Bible was composed during Shakespeare's lifetime. If you can read the King James Bible, you can read Shakespeare. Okay. So the key with reading Shakespeare, I think, is number one, go into it with an open mind. Don't go into it thinking to yourself, "Oh, this stuff is so hard, I'm never going to get it." That is nonsense. Anybody can learn some good Shakespeare. You guys have already read tougher stuff than that. Number two, it's always a good thing to have a good edition. We're using the Norton Anthology. It gives you some footnotes on some things that are maybe some explanations of some words here and there. So good editions are also helpful with Shakespeare. A little bit about the man himself. He was his father. He was born 1564. His father's name was John Shakespeare, who was, a glover. Shakespeare is actually a writer who comes from this sort of middle class, background in Elizabethan England. So Shakespeare is living under Queen Elizabeth I, who was Henry VIII's daughter, right? So her very ascent to the throne was a lot of history in itself. But Shakespeare's England was this time of great change for the nation of England. All at once, the English nation suddenly started becoming a world power. Of course, whenever we think about 16th century Europe, the Spanish were, some of the major world players. We think of the Spanish going to South America, conquering the Aztecs and the Incas. Right? This was the sort of major world power at the time. They had this great navy. Under Queen Elizabeth, they actually defeated the English navy. Actually, defeated the Spanish Armada, suddenly the English navy started becoming this great world power. But as far as Queen Elizabeth I's reign goes, You know, so Shakespeare wrote up until about the time of his death in the 1610s. Elizabeth died around 1601, 1602. I can't remember the exact date. But throughout her whole end of her life, you know, as she was growing and advancing the English Empire, she didn't have a heir, right, an heir. You know, so there was this great sort of, you know, worry who's going to become king or queen after Elizabeth's death. And then King James of Scotland, of course, becomes the main king after her. There's all kinds of interesting historical politics about why that is. Of course, King James commissioned what we now have as the King James Bible. About her time in, you know, Elizabeth's time was significant. This was when London was growing up as this great big city. You know, Shakespeare was, of course, a playwright. You know, we had the Globe Theatre, and the Blackfriars Theatre as well, which was where plays took place during the winter. But this was where the common people went to for entertainment. This was entertainment for the common person during this time. And so people went to the Globe Theatre, paid a very small fee. You know, then, you know, they were entertained. And then you had the rich people who were kind of sitting up near the stage, and everyone else was kind of like removed from it. So this was entertainment meant for the common person. So this just goes to show you that all this stuff about Shakespeare being hard, only scholars can read Shakespeare, all this stuff's bogus. Okay. But he was writing during this time of great English nationalism, right? Elizabeth defeated the Armada. Elizabeth's sort of reviving the nation of England. They're becoming a dominant power. You know, he's also living during a time of religious turmoil. You know, all the stuff that we talked about with Milton, with the Puritans, the Calvinists, the predestination, all of that stuff is, you know, a major issue during Shakespeare's time too. Not quite as extensive yet, but it's still a problem. So this was the time with the great big burgeoning city of London. You had the theater. You had other forms of entertainment too. They had something called bear baiting, which they brought bears in and made dogs fight bears to the death. That was a form of entertainment. You know, you had like I said, almost everyone showed up to the playhouse. The Puritans did not like drama. You know, actually, during Milton's time, during Oliver Cromwell ruled over England, he actually suspended the production of drama. Drama was not allowed during Cromwell's reign when Milton was his propaganda minister. So they even saw drama as this corrupting sort of negative force. But as far as the man himself, right, there's actually, so like I said, he grew up with a pretty common background. You know, schooling at the time was mostly built on the classics. So Shakespeare went to what was called a grammar school. And at the grammar school, they learned Latin grammar. You know, they read authors like Virgil and Catullus and Ovid. You know, so that a lot of the references that Shakespeare will make in his text is to this classical literature and mythology. The good news about all this stuff is you guys already have a lot of background in mythology and the classics from the stuff that we've already read before we even have gotten to Shakespeare. So a lot of these references you should be able to understand. There's actually There's actually a lot of arguments that Shakespeare really wasn't Shakespeare. A lot of people think that Shakespeare wasn't actually a real guy. The reason that they think this, there's lots of people think that the Earl of Oxford was actually the guy who wrote these plays. Some people think that it was another playwright named Christopher Marlowe. There's all kinds of conspiracy theories about was he actually a real guy. The reason that all these conspiracy theories exist is because people think there's no way a middle class guy with this basic sort of high school education for the time could have written literature that's universal and speaks to everyone throughout the ages. There's no way some uneducated guy or barely educated guy could do this. So that's a little bit of an elitist way of looking at things, right? I will be frank in saying that I think that is a bunch of malarkey, right? To quote Joe Biden, right? It's definitely a bunch of nonsense. But that I just wanted to point out that is a belief. Shakespeare pioneered a lot of the English language. He actually invented thousands of words that are now in our language. I could speak a long time about the way that these plays were written and performed. They were, I won't go into all of that. That's for an actual Shakespeare class. But they were written on these different types of documents, to make it easier for the actors to perform. Lots of times when these plays went in the circulation and then just kind of went out until the next big movie. Is almost like how movies are today. But Hamlet is the most famous of his plays, arguably. It's his great tragedy of this prince of Denmark, who lives in this really corrupt court. Of course, as you guys will see, the plays about Hamlet's father has just passed away, and his father's ghost comes to him to tell him that his uncle, who is now the king after marrying Hamlet's mother, his sister-in-law, right, that his brother actually murdered the dead king. So the play is all about Hamlet's working towards getting revenge for his father's murder, right? So just some issues to think about as you read through the play. So number one, is this ghost actually real, right? Or is this a figment of Hamlet's imagination? Throughout the play, Hamlet arguably sort of goes crazy the further along through the play we go, right? So you'll see in Act 3 that there's actually a scene where someone sees the ghost and Hamlet doesn't. Right, so is this ghost actually real? That's the first question. Then another way to think about it is through Freud's Oedipus complex. Is a theme in this play. Hamlet has sort of a weird sort of relationship with his mother. And not literally, but he's overly attached to her, we could probably say. He gets very jealous of his uncle. So that's something to think about as you read through the first 3 acts of the play. We have to think, like, it's Calvinism as a theme in the play. Like, you'll see that a lot of these characters feel guilt for what they've done. Gender as a theme in the play. We have a great female character named Ophelia, who is sort of Hamlet's girlfriend, and her father, Polonius. Polonius is this kind of guy in a court who kind of like kisses up to the king. Right? He's sort of this guy at the court who handles a lot of the business of the court. So his daughter Ophelia is who Hamlet sort of courts throughout the play. So their relationship with Hamlet and with each other, and also Ophelia's brother Laertes, is something to think about. So just some introduction to some of these characters. Then we have some other characters, Hamlet's friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Like as you'll see, the king asks them to spy on Hamlet. Right, so think about what's happening with them. But basically, as you go through the play, ask yourself, what's going on with Hamlet? Why doesn't he take revenge sooner than he does? Right, the whole play is almost about waiting for him to finally do what he sets out to do in the first few pages. Right, why does he wait? Why does he hold out so long? Why is he so indecisive? But Hamlet's often praised as being this sort of universal play for the ages. There's some great passages in this play, some great lines. A lot of phrases that we take for granted in our English today came from this play. The great to be or not to be speech. We'll talk about some of them when we actually have class on Zoom. But this play is famous for being this great example of Renaissance humanism, right? Showing that mankind is the center of the universe. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of introduction to Shakespeare. Like I said, destigmatize Shakespeare. He's not this super hard guy who has no personality that you learned about in high school. Right? High school teachers, it's not always their fault. They're just not allowed to teach about some of the racier stuff in these plays because of morality and all this stuff. Go through it with an open mind. You guys have already read harder stuff. Enjoy it. Watch if you're having trouble. There's plenty of great adaptations of Hamlet out there. Some good ones I would recommend are, there's one oldie with Laurence Olivier as the main actor from 1948, I think. There's also some recent ones. David Tennant, who played the Doctor on Doctor Who, starred in one with Patrick Stewart playing the King. That's a BBC edition. You guys can probably check out. If you have trouble reading it, definitely watch it. Right, you can see it in action. That's the way it was meant to be, a scene. And of course, The Lion King is a modern retelling of Hamlet too, so something to keep in mind. So hopefully that gave you an introduction to the man himself, as well as his England, the politics that were happening in his England. Hamlet was written in 1599, so this was right before Elizabeth's death. So until Wednesday, we'll see you guys later.